Kluane Adamek, she, her, or hers, whose traditional name is Age, has served as the Assembly of First Nations Yukon Regional Chief since January 2018. She is a proud Northerner and citizen of Kluane First Nation. Regional Chief Adamek belongs to the Duckla-Wadey clan and comes from a diverse background with Tlingit, Southern Tutchone, German, and Irish origins. After completing a Bachelor of Arts in Canadian Studies from Carleton University in 2009, she returned home to work with Yukon First Nations and local communities in the areas of education, economic development, and governance. In 2019, she completed her Master of Business Administration at Simon Fraser University. Throughout her career, she has served on a number of boards and committees, including the Yukon College Board of Governors, Kluane Dana Trust, Actua, the Aboriginal Healing Foundation, and the Aboriginal Sport Circle. She has proven experience in both private and public sectors. While pursuing her Jane Glasgow Northern Fellowship with the Walter and Duncan Gordon Charitable Foundation, she led and founded Our Voices, a collective of Northern Indigenous emerging leaders. Kluane is incredibly passionate about supporting youth and emerging leaders in the North and beyond. Regional Chief Adamek currently holds the Assembly of First Nations National Portfolios for Climate Change and the Environment, Youth and Modern Treaties. She continues to press for change in the ways young people and the next generation are included in decision-making forums. And she is committed to advancing solutions and approaching leadership from a place of values. Sara Forte is an employment and human rights lawyer and founder of Forte Law, with offices in BC and Alberta. Sexual harassment is part of Sara's lived experience and a core aspect of her legal practice. Sara brings a balanced perspective to litigation, having represented victims, companies, and those accused of sexual harassment for more than 15 years. Sara also acts as an external investigator and recently launched Stand Up Teams, a proactive, respectful workplace program that includes bystander training. Sara's passion is educating and empowering people to improve workplace respect. And she is a prolific speaker and writer. Sara is also a mother of 3 and has recently realized her dream of becoming a backyard chicken farmer. The panel will be moderated by the director of the Yukon Human Rights Commission, Birju Dattani. Originally from Calgary, Alberta, Birju has extensive academic and practical experience in the field of human rights. He was awarded a Bachelor of Laws with honors by the University of Wales, a postgraduate diploma in professional legal skills by the City University of London, and a Master of Laws in Public International Law by the London School of Economics and Political Science. In addition, Birju has spent time studying at the Honourable Society of Gray's Inn, Cambridge University, and the School of Oriental and African Studies. Birju's previous professional experience includes serving as the Assistant Regional Director at the Alberta Human Rights Commission and teaching fellow in the Faculty of Law at the School of Oriental and African Studies. The son of refugees from Uganda, Birju has a lifelong commitment to advancing the cause of human rights and is pleased to have the opportunity to support the Commission in doing so. Regional Chief Adamek, Sara Forte, and Birju Dattani will reflect on the conference materials and share accumulated experiences in addressing complex social and cultural issues. They will also discuss promising practices that can guide our pathways ahead towards a Yukon without workplace sexual harassment. Let's extend a warm welcome to our panelists.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the final panel of our conference. And it's somewhat fitting that the final panel is to discuss what's next. We have 2 very distinguished speakers with us this morning, and I'm both privileged and humbled. Welcome them, as well as you, to this morning's final panel entitled, What's Next? So if we can get right into it, let's talk first about the changes that are coming ahead. Sara, Chief Adamek, what kind of initiatives are you seeing on the horizon?
Thanks so much. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to join you. All those who are, of course, remote, we're together apart in this space. I'm joining you from Whitehorse, from the traditional territory of the Ta'an and Kluane Dun First Nations. I think this is one of the most critical times that we're in terms of what's next and how we're going to be, making these changes, on the ground, so to speak. Earlier, late last year, I should say, there was a resolution, and I wanted to speak a little bit to this resolution, Resolution 13, that was carried by chiefs in assembly at the Assembly of First Nations. And that resolution really sought to do an investigative review, right? So really looking at, okay, what do we need to look at in terms of a national organization to ensure that everybody feels safe, everybody feels valued, but especially as it relates to any types of discrimination, harassment, gender-based violence. And so this is where, I encourage you to take a look. The resolution package is on the AFN website. But for those who may be listening, you may have seen a lot of information in the media. Certainly want to acknowledge Chief Doris Bill from Kluane Dun First Nation. She was the seconder of that resolution, and Kel Salem, who is a spokesperson of the Squamish Nation in British Columbia, was the mover. And, that resolution came from a place of, and again, I think this is where it really is about the lens and like the long-term scope. This isn't about, and when we're having these conversations or we're seeking to bring to the light, so to speak, some of these issues, it certainly isn't to, bring down any particular other individual. What this really needs to be about, and what we need to get back to, is creating safe space so that whoever you are, however you identify, that you can show up to your place of work and be able to be you, be respected, be heard, be valued, and so that you're not having to deal with issues like sexualized violence, like gender-based violence, like the inappropriate comments or the treatment simply because of who you are. That's not okay. And society, especially now more than ever, is showing us that this is not okay. And so this is where, from a worldview, if we were to look at, and especially, Yukon First Nations being very much a matrilineal peoples, that the roles of women and those who identify are integral. In terms of our, the fabric of our nations with respect to governance, the responsibilities that one has, to family, to clan, to community, to nation. These are all really, really important parts of who we are as Yukon First Nations, but of course as a region. And so what is it that then we can share with the rest of the country and beyond? So, that resolution really came from a place of wanting to create positive change for the national organization to be seen as a leader in terms of creating and ensuring that anybody who either works for the organization, who's a board member of the organization, who participates in the organization's activities, feels safe, feels comfortable, and feels heard. And so ultimately, that becomes the responsibility that we have, and showing up, so to speak, as leaders. So whether, you're in an elected position or not, leadership isn't, of course, defined by your title or your role, but we've got to show up. We've got to show up for people so that they feel safe and heard and respected. And I really want to acknowledge, all those who have advanced with pursuing action to any of the experiences that they've had. I want to acknowledge those who may have not, because it's not easy and it's hard. And, you know, what I will share is I've been there. We've all been there, I think, especially in this place and time where, you know, the comments, the inappropriate gestures, especially as women. And to be clear, this doesn't mean that men don't experience these things. I don't want to get into that particular, I think, very challenging space of playing into any types of gender stereotypes. But what I want to say is that we know that women and those who identify do experience a lot of this in the workplace now. And so we need to have that addressed. And I want to acknowledge all those who are considering it, you know that you're not alone, and that, you know, the women that I talked to about some of the experiences, or people that have come forward to share their own experiences with me, like, you know, it's hard to find a woman or someone who identifies as a woman who hasn't had a negative experience at all in the workplace necessarily, or in public, where they have not felt comfortable or safe. So that's you know, real talk, so to speak. That's what it is that we're dealing with here. But with all of that, there's great opportunities. And so I really believe that with Resolution 13, for example, with the Assembly of First Nations, showing up as a leader in that way is so important. And I really look forward to the implementation of that resolution so that we can really hold up a mirror and say, what do we need to do better here? And having it not be a blame game situation that often gets created in these situations, but rather to say, let's keep people safe.
Wow, Chief Adamek, I have to say, I've got my pen here. I don't know if you've noticed, I've been taking notes of some of the things that you've said, you know, bringing to the light, you know, people at work need a safe space where they can be respected, be heard, be valued, and you are not alone. I mean, those are the points that I wrote down just because they resonated so well with me and what I see happening in this area, and I just think are so well put. So also, while you were talking, the sun came out my window here in Surrey and just shone right in my face. So I'm also getting a bit squinty here, which I apologize. And I do want to acknowledge that I'm coming to you from Surrey, from somewhere else. And I'm on the traditional unceded lands of the Coast Salish, Semiahmoo, Katsi, Tawasin, Stolo, Wasanich, and Kwantlen peoples. And I'm so grateful to be able to live and work here. I am so impressed and inspired by Resolution 13. I'm very happy to be here talking about Resolution 13 and other good news stories, because I think that narrative has been missing for so long from this subject. What I love about Resolution 13 is it's a perfect example of looking inward to make change. And the idea that, you know, we can become anti-sexist, we can become anti-racist by changing others. But the first thing we all need to do is look inside ourselves as individuals and inside ourselves as organizations if we want to affect change. That's step one. And so kudos to the Assembly of First Nations in Yukon for taking on that very difficult but really important first step in seeing some real change. I'll just pop in with a few other exciting initiatives that I'm seeing happening. Again, I love that we're taking a good news lens on this topic. Like I do a lot of speaking about sexual harassment, and rarely is it a good news story. Some things I see happening in BC, where I am, we've received some government funding to do a program called SHARP, which is the sexual harassment advice program. And that program offers 5 hours of free legal advice to people who have experienced sexual harassment at work. And that, you know, as a lawyer who bills people by the hour, I know that's a significant impediment for people, especially to take that very first step and call someone, because there's all sorts of reasons why people don't want to make that call. And at least removing the fact that you're going to get a bill for that at a time where you might be unwell or unemployed is really meaningful. So I'm not running that program. It's run by Class, which is a not-for-profit organization in BC, but I'm really proud to have been part of developing that program and their training. And a couple of my lawyers here at the firm are on the roster of lawyers that you can get 5 hours of free legal advice from in this program. So I think that's a really, really exciting one. And I don't know as well, but I have heard bits about Rosa, which I think is a program happening in Ontario, also offering some education, but I think also some legal advice through that program. So those are some things that I see that are happening that are really promising and just like changing the landscape, where we can actually start to get some traction to make change.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sara, and thank you, Chief Adamek, for those contributions. I'm going to do something which is a little bit unconventional for a moderator. So I'm going to break through the fourth wall a little bit and take a couple of minutes, and I promise to not take much more than that, just to explain and expand our 5-year project aimed at eradicating sexual harassment in the territory, which is funded by Justice Canada and, of course, the No More conference that everybody is participating in today and yesterday, and what that's going to look like going forward, a little bit about what the project is about. And the No More conference is our first major conference, which all of you have participated in some way, shape, or form for the last 2 days. Our goals for the No More conference itself has been to establish, firstly, a baseline for knowledge, and secondly, to raise awareness of existing frameworks, which I think participants of the conference would have seen. So not only, and oftentimes people think of behaviors when they think in terms of sexual harassment. So in terms of establishing knowledge, some of those behaviors that constitute sexual harassment are certainly obvious. Some of them are more subtle. But equally, in terms of the knowledge transmission piece, we wanted to address the challenges around reporting. We all know that sexual harassment is significantly underreported. We wanted to address, and we do want to address, how reports of sexual harassment in the workplace are addressed and investigated. We know that there are a lot of challenges around that. We are aiming at looking at the role of bystanders, which we've touched upon a little bit during the conference. And Sara, I'm thinking now in particular of your wonderful keynote speech yesterday. But we want to explore some of that, both with our communities, our organizations, employers, and stakeholders, and all of those things which they find particularly challenging around the issue of baseline knowledge. We also want in future years to capacity build. So in future years, the project is going to aim at building capacity once we've gone some way in establishing the current baseline of knowledge, or to figure out what that baseline is, so that we're all, for the most part, as best as we can, working off of the same page. And again, to really draw an awareness of those existing frameworks so that we can better help to build capacity. I would also say that one of the things, being a new Yukoner, and being humbled by these wonderful communities that we have, is I would emphasize that as part of this project and as part of these efforts and these exertions, that we need you. And I'm now speaking to, not just everyone participating in this conference over the course of the last 2 days, but we firmly believe in taking an approach which is ensconced within our communities. So we at the Commission will endeavor to do the work to live up to the highest aspirations of our mandate and to serve our communities. And of course, we endeavor to serve you. But to take something from the pandemic, we are in this together. And so ideally we're going to succeed together, and we want to take a community approach. We do want to hear from all of you. So I'm sure I've taken a little bit more than 2 minutes. So, but thank you so much for giving me that opportunity as the moderator, and to bend the rules a little bit, to talk to you a little bit about this project of ours. But I want to come to the subject of what are some of the biggest challenges that you see to change? What do we need to overcome? And again, I'd like to put that question to stir the conversation around that a little bit.
Yeah, I can jump on that first, Birju, and just thank you for explaining more about the No More project. I think that fits perfectly with everything else we've been talking about here in terms of what we can look forward to as a platform for change. I think a couple of, I sort of have 2 points that I'm thinking that are barriers that we need to overcome. One is silence of bystanders. And, I talked at some length about this in my keynote speech, so I don't want to, I'd commend it to anyone that hasn't seen it if you want to hear more about that. But, moving away from this culture where it's none of our business, and moving towards a place where we have a shared understanding that sexual harassment will not be tolerated. And so we're all empowered to speak up about it when it happens. Just in the way that we would speak up, for instance, if we saw another unsafe work hazard. If as a bystander you saw a box teetering over a coworker's head, surely you wouldn't say, well, that's none of my business, I'm not going to say anything. But if you see someone who is being subjected to sexual harassment at work, which is also unsafe and can cause them harm, just changing that mindset so that we can all be feel comfortable and empowered to raise those issues. And the second is also silence, and it's silence of reporting. There are so many reasons why victims do not report sexual harassment. Feelings of powerlessness and shame, fear of retaliation. What if I'm not believed? One of the issues that I see happening quite frequently is this snowball effect that victims are worried about, where maybe I'm willing to go a little bit, like I'm willing to talk to someone about it, but I'm not really sure that I want it to go farther than that. And so there's this fear that if I start that ball rolling, is it going to run away on me and turn into something that I have no control over, that is not transparent to me, and is turned into a big, huge thing that I never wanted in the first place, because I really just wanted the conduct to stop. And that is something I see many, many victims, mostly women, that I'm speaking to. That's one of their number one concerns and one of the number one barriers why they're not wanting to bring things forward. When you come to talk to a lawyer, it's solicitor-client privilege. You have the choice, and one of your choices is to leave it in my file, and I'm not going to do anything about it, and you don't have to do anything about it. You retain that right to maintain your confidentiality, and many times that's the choice victims are making after they talk through with me about what all the processes involve and what that's going to look like for them.
Wonderful. Thanks, Sara. And Chief Adamek, what are some of the biggest challenges you see to change, and what do we need to do to overcome that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Sara. And I really appreciate, the approach here in terms of, we've got to be like hard on the issues, and soft on the people, but at the same time, this whole concept, which I think is really important, the silence of bystanders, and this, I don't recall where I saw it, but this whole concept of like silence is violence, right? In and of itself, like if you're witnessing these things, it's kind of, I mean, I don't want to tune it to compare like some of the issues, the very live issues with respect to sexual harassment. We look to other issues like when we see bullying in the workplace, right? I'm not comparing those two things against one another, but my point that I want to make here is that when you see anything happening that's not right, it's not easy to always like speak up and speak out. At the same time, I think that the more that we encourage each other to do that, that we're going to see these issues being seriously addressed, because they are serious issues that need a serious response. So, one other piece I want to mention here is it's the patterns. The patterns that are existing in not calling out the inappropriate behavior. And to be really clear, like I think myself, as I'm sure many of you who are listening, we all have our own experiences of things that have happened to us that are not okay. And in my experience, I have been in spaces where I've looked around wondering if anyone's going to say anything about what just happened, and nobody does. I think we've all probably felt that too. So it becomes this moment to say, how can I, like as individuals, how can I show up differently when I'm seeing something happen? And at the same time, in the cultures that exist within the organizations that we're a part of, or the cultures that exist within the spaces and places in terms of the work that we're doing, how can we create better ways for everybody to be able to be part of addressing the problem? And that's where I do really see, and I think people, may think that in, for example, like these kind of, the question around, what is power is a really interesting question. I think we Birju and I, we've had this conversation, this concept of power being, those who are in positions to be able to make decisions. Well, from my perspective, power is really about, the ability to empower others to make change. But, in a lot of places, and we see, in various organizations, that, the hierarchy that exists. And so if you're not in the decision-making seat, then what real options do you have? Because there's always concerns of, fear of retaliation or reprisal, or am I going to lose my job, or am I not going to have a good reference if I do this? Like, those are all the real thoughts that I'm sure that, I've had or others have had in their own experiences. But I think what's really important here to acknowledge is that, like, the more that we address this, the more that the people coming in behind us into these places and spaces are going to hopefully have less and less to deal with until we get to that place where it is no longer such a real live issue, right? It's not something that is expected when you go into certain places of work. And none of that's okay. And I think my message to those who are listening is men and women who are listening, and those who identify, I'm with you. Like, it's it in terms of the comments, the inappropriateness, the feelings of discomfort. Like, I've felt those, and it's hard, like leaving, meetings being really upset, or, in tears, or the issues that come with not knowing how to deal. It's so great to hear, Sara, that there's a new way for people who do have these issues to actually come forward and to get advice, because it's incredibly unnerving. It's scary. It's costly. And so how do we create within each organization we're in the ability for somebody who's having some of those issues know that they're going to be supported in having them addressed? And that would be, I think, is really the space that we can look at moving forward in all of our respective organizations, so that employees know, people who are working in for and around the organization know that if something happens, there's a process, there's supports, and there's resources, so that that individual doesn't feel so isolated, isn't in a situation where they're dealing with perhaps concern of reprisal, and so on and so forth. So I'll leave my reflections there. Birju, but in short, with you, I hear you, and we've got to make things better.
I just want to jump in on something Kluane was
Sure.
saying. Of course, again, I've made notes of you. You definitely, Chief Adamek, you have a way with words, that's for sure, of putting things really beautifully and talking about being hard on the issues, but soft on the people. And, I think another barrier here is this idea that this becomes a battle and taking sides. And that if you are a bystander, for instance, and you speak up, or if you're a victim and you speak up, that means there's going to be negative consequences for the person who's engaged in the conduct, and it's a battle royale. And that's not what bystander activism is about. Bystander activism is not about getting people fired or having them being disciplined. It's about speaking up, maybe when there's a smaller issue, and like certainly there's some kinds of sexual harassment that result in the perpetrator needing to leave the organization and lose their job. Like that is an outcome that is sometimes what's required. But in many, many cases, there's opportunities for education, for collaboration, and so raising these things, isn't necessarily giving everybody whistles so they can referee and call out, misconduct and march them into the HR person's office. It's about all of us being comfortable and empowered to talk about these issues when they come up, so that we're dealing with them at the smaller level. And so hopefully it stops happening at all. I mean, that's the goal, right? The goal is not to, attack and kill every offender like of sexual harassment. The goal is that we don't have sexual harassment at all anymore. And so I think moving, that's one barrier that I see, is that sort of mindset that, if I wade in here as a bystander, if I speak up as a victim, it's going to become an adversarial issue. And that's not true. And there are ways to deal with these issues. And the number one way is to deal with them when they're small.
Thank you for that, Sara, and thank you for that, Chief Adamek. Both of your contributions to that question were immensely pithy. I'm taking notes on my screen as well here, and both of you have touched upon this next question a little bit, but I'm hoping we can flesh this out a little bit more. So, what I'd like to ask the both of you is, we've discussed some of the challenges and what we need to do to overcome them. But I want us to maybe flesh out a little bit more, what can we do to overcome those challenges? And again, I know that both of you have touched upon this so far, but can we flesh that out a little bit more, if that's okay?
Yeah, I'll start on that, Birju. I know at the end of my keynote yesterday, one of the things I asked listeners to do is to put in the chat commitments they were making to be part of positive change. And someone put in a commitment that as a leader, they said it so well, something like, I'm going to let people know that I have a lot of space for a lot of things, but sexual harassment at work is not tolerated. And I think that, we all have a responsibility, each and every one of us, but leaders also have a responsibility. And what I love about that statement is that leader is now empowering all the people that work in that organization to know that they will be supported if they come forward with a complaint, and to know that they will be supported if they intervene as a bystander, because the standard and the expectation has been set. So I think one strategy is top down, is leadership really clearly setting out the expectations, which then empowers everybody else to then, be moving towards that common purpose. And I guess the other thing is just finding new and creative ways to facilitate people coming forward with complaints. I was really excited to watch the demo of the SPOT program. which, for those who weren't there yesterday, is an anonymous complaint, human-computer interaction, I guess I'll say it. I'm not really a tech person, but it's a way that you can engage anonymously if you want. It asks you questions. It helps you sort of crystallize the issues and, make sure that it's recorded and that you've thought through all the points while it's fresh in your mind, and then gives you your options about how you might bring it forward if you want to. And I think allowing for an anonymous complaint mechanism is one way that reduces a barrier. Having, with the people that had developed that said, some people just aren't comfortable talking to another human about what's happening to them. So having a way they can interact, completely privately, but still sort of give them a way to work through these issues. So I think those are a few of the creative ways that I see that are happening to encourage complaints to come forward so that we can bring these things into the light.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Sarah. Chief Adamek, what can we do to overcome some of these challenges that we've identified? And again, I know you've touched upon some of them already, but could we flesh some of that out a little bit?
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And, I think definitely that whole very real and I think, framing it for what it is, like it's there's fear. Like there's a very real fear for in coming forward. There's a very real fear in a moment that something has just happened to you. Like, how do you respond, right? You're kind of like, do I say something? Do I do something? What do I do? Where can I go? And if we take a look at history here for a minute, right? Like this is really, in the last, and I look to experts like Sarah and others who are on, joining us remotely. Like things have really shifted in terms of like the legislation that now exists. There's new workplace legislation that the federal government has just advanced with. But, we're really, I think at this moment in time, starting to really address or working to address a lot of these issues. And so I think it is organizations also, because it's an uncomfortable space. It's an uncomfortable conversation, right? You go into perhaps any organization to say, okay, how do you deal with sexual harassment complaints? And I'm guessing, right, that everyone's like, oh, right. How do we do that? So I think this is where it's also being, really mindful of the way in which we're viewing this type of specifically this type of harassment, because I think you made a really good point earlier. If we were thinking about Sarah, your point earlier about like, a hanging box or wires that are like, right, hanging when you walk into an office, right? You're like, okay, we need to address that immediately. Like that's unsafe. In the same way, right, that when we see somebody, that those images that we see about, considerations for mental health and wellness, right? Like you see someone walking down the street who may not have any type of physical impediment or challenge, like a broken leg, right? You see those images and then you're like, well, actually, they're dealing with all of this. We need to start thinking about the workplace in a different way, and not, I think, to create a space where people aren't having to go through all of those fears of bringing things forward, in the same way that as organizations, we're not scared to really start to peel back the layers to say, whoa, like, is this a safe place of work? Are things happening that we're kind of not wanting to deal with because maybe we don't know how, or maybe we don't have a process, or maybe we ourselves don't have the resources or the experiences or the knowledge. I think that this needs to become part of, right, the common practice, the check-ins from a governance perspective, from an operational perspective, to say, where are we at, right? Like, do we have a process? Is it clear? Do people understand? And are people going to feel supported? So this whole spot, I think that's great. Would love to see perhaps some more infrastructure be developed for organizations to be able to say, yeah, we want to incorporate something into the way in which we operate, because the more that we don't talk about it or address it, like as you mentioned, I think, Sarah, like dealing with it when issues first happen, or perhaps when issues are more small in nature in terms of, things getting to that place where things have gotten really, really bad. How do we support both the individual and the organization to be able to respond in the best way possible? And I think those become, Birju and Sara, the resources and the tools that people really are needing. People are getting more comfortable to talk about, but I think that's where we do need to be really open to vulnerability, open to having hard conversations. And again, Resolution 13, was supported by nearly 80% of the chiefs in assembly earlier last year. At the same time, my question would be, where were, the 20% who didn't, what was some of the rationale? What were some of the questions? Like, what more was needed? Because from my perspective, like, that's a huge mandate, but it's still clear that there's some discomfort. So why is that? Right? Why is there discomfort and people feeling safe? What is that about? Is that about protecting behavior, or is that because people don't understand and they need more information?
I think that's a great point, Chief Adamek, and just being prepared to ask those questions and openly listen to someone that has a different viewpoint or has voted in a different way. That I think that's a really challenging thing to do, but that's where the opportunity lies. It's not sort of talking to the same people all the time who are already sort of in your thinking alike to you. It's reaching out to the people that maybe have a different perspective. It's fantastic.
Absolutely. And thank you both for that. I was just reminded, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, but 10 seconds. It reminded me of a quote by Max Planck, the physicist, that if you don't change the way that you look at things, the things that you're looking at in turn will not change. So, and I'm going to stop there because, again, 10 seconds. And I think that very nicely brings us to the Q&A portion of our panel. So the team is going to start pushing some of those questions. So we'll get going here in just a second. So our first question for both you, Sara, and for you, Chief Adamek, comes from Rachel Hansen. And Rachel asks, I'm so overwhelmed in a good way with all this amazing information, and I appreciate it all. I live in Inuvik and experience sexual harassment / assault. However, is there any available resources likewise for the Northwest Territories?
I guess I can jump in on that, Birju, just to say, one,
sure.
I don't know, and maybe one of the other two of you does. But I'm here from British Columbia. Like, sexual harassment is an issue that has more similarities than differences. When you talk about different jurisdictions, sexual harassment in Northwest Territories, I can tell you shares a lot of common features with sexual harassment anywhere else in Canada or the world. So there's lots of resources that are being developed that would have broad applicability. It wouldn't necessarily be specific programs where you could, for instance, get free legal advice, but in terms of understanding more about what is sexual harassment and how to take action, and the legal tests, those are all very similar across different jurisdictions. And I see someone handily from the commission here has pointed out that the Northwest Territories has its own Human Rights Commission, similar to the Yukon Human Rights Commission, which would have programming and resources available as well.
Chief Adamek, did you have anything to add to that?
I want to thank you for sharing. That I certainly, want to acknowledge that it's not easy to be able to, vocalize and share those experiences. So I want to thank you for that. In terms of learning, I'd say I'm very much in that same place as you are, where this, the resources, the supports, which is, I think, a great reason why this conference is happening, is to really better inform people of what's there. I'm, a little more familiar, of course, I'd say, with the Yukon region. But in terms of Northwest Territories, I'd look to, and thanks to whomever was able to share that information with the conference participants just a moment ago. But perhaps, Birju, if there's any specific recommendations you may have as to, in that particular jurisdiction where one can go. I think that is important, and it's clear that there needs to be more of a, I don't know if it would be appropriate for there to be a one-stop shop. Each of these issues, right, requires, different information, different approaches. There's different ways of responding, but certainly it does feel like people like myself, like you, need to know where to go. So.
Absolutely. And I think what I will say to that is, and just to pick up on something that Sara said, but also perhaps to, as a response to Rachel's question, the Northwest Territories does have a Human Rights Commission. The laws on sexual harassment aren't different across jurisdictions. And so a lot of the information that we've been discussing in terms of, throughout the last 2 days, in terms of what sexual harassment is, what the legal tests are, those are pretty much the same. And so outside of Ontario and British Columbia, which have a direct access model where you would effectively have to find a lawyer to advocate for you before a tribunal, the Northwest Territories Human Rights Commission, that would be a number that you can call. There'll be someone on the other end of the line to provide you with specific information to that territory. And I think what I would say is they probably have a philosophy which is similar to ours here at the Yukon Human Rights Commission, which is that if you call, you're not going to have someone that says, well, hey, I'm sorry, I can't help you. We only deal with this limited thing. They will, of course, provide you, I'm sure, with resources that are out there in those communities about where you can seek support, what else is out there. They'll give you, they'll refer you to the relevant resources, and they'll be here to hear you as well. And equally, what I will say to Rachel is, Rachel, you are more than welcome to call our office anytime. I know your question is about the Northwest Territories, but if you're feeling that you don't know where to begin, even though it's in the Northwest Territories, you can always give us a call, and let us know if you want us to send you an email after this is over and done with. We can provide you with our direct line and perhaps an email address here at the Commission where you can begin contact with us if you want to do that. But yeah, and their ethos and philosophy, I do have a little bit of experience with that Human Rights Commission, and every time I've dealt with them, they've been fantastic. So I think you can expect a very good service from them as well. And that we have a second question from Callum Stewart, which is that 22% of men have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace in their lifetime. What services are there for men? Are they the same as they are for women? Would either of you like to?
I can certainly answer that in terms of the service offerings I've seen, and perhaps Birju, you could answer that specifically to the Yukon Human Rights Commission. But there are some, certainly some legal clinics that are designed to serve certain communities of people who have been historically disadvantaged, like women, like trans people. But the majority of the services that I'm seeing are not limited by gender. Again, whether you're a man or a woman or a person of a different gender identity, there is no there's no distinguishing. The SHARP program, for instance, that I was referring to in BC offers services to any person who has experienced sexual harassment at work. And there is, I know from my work that there is a lot of, there are additional barriers sometimes for men to come forward, or can be different barriers with complaints. But there is no doubt that sexual harassment happens to men, and there are services available, and the laws apply to them exactly the same.
I'll speak very briefly about the Human Rights Commission, and then invite Chief Adamek to respond to the question. But in terms of the commission services, the service is from the standpoint of the complaint enforcement, or the human rights enforcement part of our mandate. Complaints for men, are treated in the same way. It applies the same legal tests, and of course, our processes don't differ based on one's gender identity, one's gender expression. So from the standpoint of the commission, in the provision of the service that we are mandated to provide from an enforcement standpoint, it doesn't differ. I think from an educational standpoint, likewise, one of the things that we are able to do, depending on the nature of requests, is oftentimes we have requests for things like sexual harassment training coming from the community, coming from organizations within the community, some of which are very specific requests. And we are always able to tailor that to the specific request that's made. So if we have a request that says, well, can you provide training that focuses on what men are experiencing? Of course, we would go out to research that. We would refer to the relevant subject matter experts and make sure that our information is up to date, that's innovative, and that's going to be helpful. But that's what you can expect from the Human Rights Commission from that standpoint. But Chief Adamek, do you have any thoughts with respect to that question?
Again, appreciate the, in terms of being very much aware and mindful of, a complaint is a complaint is a complaint, and harassment is harassment is harassment. So I want to acknowledge that, and as I had expressed earlier, right, we know that it isn't any particular gender that only experiences what it is that we're talking about here, that everybody does experience that. So I want to thank the question, thank the speaker for the question. It's really great, I think, for people to know, exactly where they can go for the supports that they may be needing.
Wonderful. We have a question from Lynn, and Lynn asks, do you have suggestions for how to bring people into this conversation that are resistant to new policies and legislation, such as older generations or people coming to the Yukon from other cultural backgrounds? With Resolution 13, is it seen as worthwhile to pursue engagement with the 20% who voted against? So that's an interesting question. And again, Chief Adamek, perhaps I can start with you. Lynn makes specific reference with Resolution 13 as part of that question. So perhaps I'll put this question to you first, Chief Adamek.
I think that is exactly, the space and place that a lot of us are in. Or how do you help people understand, the seriousness, the severity, the appropriateness, why it isn't okay to maybe give me a hug and kiss me on the cheek, because you're not going to do that to anyone else, but you're going to do it to me, and that makes me uncomfortable. I'm just giving you an example, right? How do you have those conversations? And I think that's where I look to, the kind of the culture of an organization. Like, is the organization or the group or the team, what processes are set to have hard conversations, and are the decision makers in terms of whether from a policy perspective, or those who are leading in terms of human resources, like, it's almost like doing a temperature check, like, where are things at within the organization, and how are hard conversations, how do those hard conversations happen? Those would be some of the questions that I think that, in terms of not only my own experiences, but definitely what I've heard. And I think it is, well, sometimes frustrating to have to help people understand, the issues. And I say this because, I find myself personally in a lot of places and spaces where it has, inadvertently become part of my role is to educate people, both from an Indigenous and non-Indigenous perspective, from a, I identify as she, her, my experience being a woman. So I think that it is finding ways, and that example of like the wires hanging to like how people are actually feeling or what's being experienced. We've got to think of ways to help people understand why, right? The why, isn't it okay for people to feel this way? That's something that most of the time I'd like to think people do get, but it's the actions I think that people really need to understand. And so how do we create the spaces and places to have more of those conversations? So I don't know if I've answered your question per se, but I think it is thinking about how to help someone who has no understanding understand. And that unfortunately can be very frustrating. But if we're, again, eyes on the long-term goal here, if that's going to help create that understanding, then maybe we need to spend some time to look at that. The next part of the question, the older generations, I mean, that's definitely something that, in my work, I'm one of 3 women on a board of 11, with 11 men, those who identify as men. And so, it's not been easy. And when we look in the political places and spaces, like it's very clear that there are, in terms of statistics and information and data, there's far more men involved in the political spaces than there are women. Like that's, let's change that. That's something I hope we can change in my lifetime anyway. But, we've got to be able to have those hard conversations. And we've got to find ways to do that again doesn't become a battle, right, as Sara put it, but it's like, again, removing it from anything that then is really, really personal to like talking about the actual issue. And the issue is that people need to feel safe at work and shouldn't feel anything other than safe at work. So let's focus on that. I also, in terms of resolution 13, I mean, I made reference to like, there was obviously people who perhaps didn't support, or who may have, contrary views or opinions. At this point in time, like the resolution was carried, and it was carried with 80%, so it will be implemented. But I think that there are, there could and should be opportunities for those who may not have been supportive to really seek to themselves understand what it is that the spirit and intent of that resolution really is about. And so I'm not overly concerned with responding to those who didn't support it. I'm more concerned about ensuring that the resolution is implemented as it was directed by the high majority that did support that resolution.
I think those are great answers, Chief Adamek. And, when Chief Adamek and I had a chat to prepare for this panel, we were talking about the sort of like, oh, don't worry, it's just so-and-so. He doesn't know better, or he's older, or he's whatever. That's something that, we've both come across in our personally, but also, in the work that we do. And so you know, moving away from that as like just, you know, complete excuse for conduct that makes other people at work feel unsafe. And then I think precisely what Chief Adamek said, like, I think the way to proceed here is to bring people in through a collaborative approach, because certainly if you approach it in an adversarial way, that's when people are going to get defensive and dug into their positions. So finding creative ways to bring them in and engage them, and not, in my view, and this, you know, I'm not speaking specifically about Resolution 13 here, but just to sort of the broader question of, you know, people who are not on board, is I don't think we should just give up on them because these conversations are hard, or we think they'll never agree. And I think as employers and organizations and people working together, we actually need to bring them on board so that we can have a place where people can be safe, be heard, be respected, and be valued.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Just had another question pop in. And this will be, I think, our final question, since we have about 2 minutes. And the question is, what is the most inspiring response/resolution to workplace sexual harassment that you're aware of? Chief Adamek, did you want to start with that, and then I'll have Sarah perhaps answer? Or Sarah, did you?
This is a bit of a tough question because I'm not sure. I guess for me, and I don't, maybe Chief Adamek, you're on the same page. Is like, are we asking about a specific outcome of a specific situation? Because of course, you know, for all of us, I think those are hard to talk about because there's generally layers of privacy and confidentiality and sensitivity relating to that. You know, I guess, you know, what I can say, and I think what we're talking about here is inspiring, you know, ideas that have potential to bring about change in sexual harassment. And, you know, I have to say, for me, I've been very inspired by this conference, and I'm not just saying that because I'm here and I suppose I've been part of it. So maybe that's something I shouldn't say, but the other aspects of the conference, for instance, the theater production, like what I'm inspired by is seeing these grassroots efforts take light and watching people work so hard on finding creative ways to bring people to the table. And the example I'll give is that theater production yesterday, as just I've done so many conferences on sexual harassment over the years globally, and that I've never seen that. And so it's very exciting to me. One, just the initiative itself was exciting for me, but just like the idea, there's still things to try here. Like this isn't a time, like we've tried everything. You know, that was one of the things with Me Too that I really got frustrated with. It was so great to see all these stories coming forward and raising this awareness of just the pervasiveness of sexual harassment. But then the stories would just stop and it would end with, well, that's horrible. But there was never any discussion about, okay, so what can we do about it? And so it's very exciting to me and inspiring to see that there are organizations like yours in Yukon who are doing the hard work of finding creative ways, and that we're far from down for the count on sexual harassment. Like there's still lots that we can do, and lots of people are putting lots of cool energy behind it. You're muted, Chief Adamek.
Thanks. I think likewise, and again, you know, being mindful of maybe some of the specifics, but I'd say some of the moments that have been, in particular, really encouraging for me is when the bystanders have been the ones to speak up. because there's a certain emotional weight when, if something is happening to you as an individual, and you're kind of there like, how do I respond to this? What do I do? What do I say? And it's kind of like the world stops in that moment when something like that happens. But the moments that I've seen, the moments that have been really inspiring is when I've seen the bystanders address it right away. And, do we need that more of that? Absolutely. But those have been the moments where I'm like, yeah, that's what needs to happen here. Because it's not okay. And I'm speaking to more like when things are said, as opposed to like some of the physical, when we think about sexualized violence or sexual harassment, right? Like we know that there's like a broad scope of like what that can look and or feel like. But those have been the moments that have left me as an individual, but also I think as part of a collective, to know that while they also are probably uncomfortable saying something that they did in a moment, that it needed to be said, and it doesn't have to sit on the shoulders of those who are experiencing it themselves, because that and what we haven't maybe got into in depth, and I'd be maybe this is for the next time we all gather, is kind of like that like psychological harassment also, and how like we're going, I might be a bit on a tangent here, but the long-term impacts of some of this stuff are really hard, and so how are we then supporting people in the long term also, and mindful of people who may be coming into the workplace who have already had experiences that we really don't know anything about.
Thank you so much, Chief Adamek. And I think that that's a really great note to end on. And I want to thank both of you for taking time out of your important work, the important work that both of you do, and to attend this conference and to share your knowledge with us. I myself have been humbled by the learning experience that the both of you have provided to me personally, and I'm sure I can speak for the commission in saying that this was truly enlightening. It's the beginning of a conversation, certainly far from the end of one. So there'll be opportunities to continue, and I know that we could have probably made this panel a 2 or a 3 hour event, and just before I let everybody go, you talk, I would be remiss if I didn't thank my team for putting all of this together. So to Tori, to Drew, to Lisa, Amna, Madeline, Alex, and Vida, who managed to put this together and to pivot with the pandemic. Originally, this was supposed to happen at a physical location, and to put all of this together remotely and to engage people. I mean, they've done an absolutely amazing job. And also a thank you to Mike for his technical assistance and support during this conference. So I want to thank all of you, and thank you for allowing me to cheat a little bit during our panel. I know that I contributed. I was a little bit more than a referee at times, but so thank you to all of you for your indulgence. And again, I hope you enjoy the rest of your morning. And yes, thank you.
Thank you so much to our panelists for being available to answer questions from our conference participants. This brings us to the end of the final day of No More. The Yukon Human Rights Commission would like to extend a huge thank you to everyone who made this conference possible, from our partners to our attendees. This first conference focused on raising the level of knowledge surrounding workplace sexual harassment, and also addressed the reporting issues and options for those experiencing harassment. Between now and the next conference in 2023, yes, we will be hosting another conference. We hope to expand our community partnerships and continue building capacity in Yukon workplaces to address and prevent workplace sexual harassment. We hope to see you all in 2 years, so stay tuned for that. And if you would like any more information or to partner with the Commission on training opportunities or other projects, please reach out to us at anytime.